Good afternoon. My name is Father Pius Pietrek, and as I think most of you know, I serve as the Vice Chair of the Board of the Legal Services Corporation. I think our theme for today has been storytelling. It's a little bit of story time with LSC, so I hope you don't mind if I tell a little story. When I was first on the board, one of our first initiatives was to appoint a new president. We had an interim president at the time, and I was in my little office in my little parish in rural Ohio, in Zanesville, Ohio, and I get a very excited call from John Levy, our board chair. And I know you're asking yourself, how is an excited call from John Levy different from every other call from John Levy? More excited. And he was very excited because he had found a wonderful candidate for president, a great guy. We've got him. I want you to talk to him. Even after a year, I was a little skeptical about John's overexcitement every once in a while. But nonetheless, I was able to talk to this candidate that he had decided would be wonderful for us. And I had a little bit of a discussion with the man we would eventually hire, Jim Sandman. And I remember what sticks in my mind is one part of that conversation in particular. Because Jim, in our conversations, expressed a bit of surprise to me that when he had come to the LSC headquarters and walked around, he saw on the walls lots of pictures. Pictures of congressmen and senators, of presidents and federal officials. What he didn't see were any pictures of poor people, of our clients, of the people we served. He thought that was very strange. I thought that was very strange too, but what I thought was right was him thinking it's strange, and I remember thinking to myself, John was right. We've got our man. Because anybody who would say to themselves that the first thing that we need to keep in front of us is the face of the people that we serve, those who are poor and without resources, who are in need of an advocate for justice, is the right man to lead LSC. And whatever else I've done on my now almost 14 years on the LSC board, 2 votes I am most proud of. The first was to approve Jim Sandman as our president, and the second was to approve his successor, Ron Flagg, as our president. Now, as many of you know, before joining us, Jim Sandman had a 30-year career with Arnold & Porter and was the firm's managing partner. That aside, then he worked as general counsel for DC's public school before coming to us at LSC. Since leaving us, he has served as the distinguished lecturer and senior consultant to the Future of the Profession Initiative, say that real quickly, at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School, and he's the current vice chair of the DC Access to Justice Commission. It is my very, very great pleasure to welcome once again Jim Sandman to the Legal Services Corporation and to offer us his presentation. Thank you, Jim.
Good afternoon. We celebrate today the realization of a vision that once both audacious and firmly rooted in the most important and foundational of our nation's values. The vision was the creation of a federally funded nationwide network of community-based legal aid organizations to provide access to justice for low-income people. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were only 3 legal aid organizations in the United States, one in New York, one in New Jersey, and one in Chicago. There is no truth to the urban legend that it was John Levy who in 1888 founded what was called the Bureau of Justice in Chicago. But I understand why the rumor persists. Legal aid organizations proliferated over the next 6 decades, but their growing numbers did not capture the severe limitations on their reach. According to Earl Johnson's definitive history of legal aid in the United States, 40% of legal aid societies in the early 1960s did not have a single paid staff member. They depended entirely on volunteers. Others had only one part-time attorney or 2. Legal aid was largely an urban phenomenon. Large parts of the country had no legal aid organization of any kind, and funding for legal aid came entirely from private philanthropy. Legal aid was charity. Then came the vision. It originated with two Yale Law School graduates, Edgar Kahn and Jean Camper Kahn. They published an article in the Yale Law Journal in 1964 advocating for the creation of a nationwide network of community legal services offices. A pre-publication copy of their article came to the attention of Sargent Shriver, then head of the federal government's Office of Economic Opportunity. Shriver stayed up until 2 a.m. reading the article. It was like Columbus discovering America, Shriver said, an exciting thing for me to discover, something that captured my mind and my imagination. Shriver decided he wanted to make legal services a component of the Office of Economic Opportunity. But there was a problem. The prospect of a federally funded national legal aid program alarmed some components of the bar. Edgar and Jean Kahn, now working with Shriver, wisely engaged with the leadership of the American Bar Association and advocated for their vision. The ABA president, Lewis Powell, later a Supreme Court justice, was convinced of the merit of their program and led the campaign for its endorsement in the ABA House of Delegates. Powell personally drafted the resolution of support presented to the House of Delegates. Because of his towering professional stature and his masterful lobbying, the resolution passed on a voice vote without debate, unanimously. That resolution is regarded as one of the most important in the ABA's history. With the ABA's support, the first federally funded legal services program was created in 1965. Ever since then, year in and year out, the American Bar Association has been our country's most important, most stalwart, and most effective advocate for federal funding of civil legal aid. The Office of Economic Opportunity's Legal Services Network expanded in the late 1960s and early 1970s. A bipartisan congressional group recognized the desirability of institutionalizing federal support for legal services in an independent corporate entity funded by Congress, with a bipartisan board to be appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Their work led to the enactment of the Legal Services Corporation Act in 1974. The Act's first section, the Congressional Findings and Statement of Purpose, marked a revolution in the status of legal aid in the United States. Congress stated that there is a need to provide equal access to the system of justice in our nation for individuals who seek redress of grievances, that there is a need to provide high-quality legal assistance to those who would otherwise be unable to afford adequate access to legal counsel, and that providing legal assistance to those who face an economic barrier to adequate legal counsel will best serve the ends of justice. The consequences of these pronouncements were profound. Congress was, for the first time, recognizing the provision of legal services to low-income people as an important government function to serve the ends of justice. Legal aid was not charity. Congress's explicit endorsement of the federal government's responsibility for providing access to justice may have appeared novel. It was anything but. I believe the enactment of the Legal Services Corporation Act was deeply grounded in what the founders of our country and the framers of our national government emphasized over and over again was their first and most important goal: justice. James Madison wrote in Federalist Number 51, "Justice is the end of government. It is the end of civil society. It ever has been and ever will be pursued until it be obtained, or until liberty be lost in the pursuit." Thomas Jefferson wrote, "The most sacred of the duties of government is to do equal and impartial justice to all its citizens." Alexander Hamilton wrote, "The first duty of society is justice." The very first line of the Constitution cites establishing justice as a core purpose of our national government. The idea behind the Legal Services Corporation Act was not radical. It was a homecoming. The Act has stimulated three transformational results over the past 50 years. First, it has changed the national landscape of legal aid. Sustained federal funding has brought legal aid far beyond urban centers to all corners of the country, including rural areas and the American territories. Today's map of legal aid offices funded by LSC bears no resemblance to the bleak picture Earl Johnson described before federal funding. Because of the Legal Services Corporation Act, legal aid is now truly national. Second, federal funding demonstrated the societal value of legal aid, the return on investment, so effectively that it has stimulated hundreds of millions of dollars annually in additional legal aid funding from state and local governments. Before the Legal Services Corporation Act, state and local funding for legal aid was unheard of. But in significant part because of the example of the federal government and the results achieved by the legal aid programs funded by LSC, state and local governments across the United States are now the second largest source of funding for LSC grantees, more than $400 million per year at the last accounting. The brilliance of the vision we celebrate today has been embraced and propagated by all levels of government. Not everywhere yet, but stay tuned. And third, with now 50 or more years of service to their communities, LSC grantees have become community pillars. They are deeply integrated into their communities, not merely accepted, but embraced and beloved. They are partners with public health clinics, veteran centers, domestic violence shelters, social services organizations, local government agencies, homeless shelters, public libraries, courts, local bar associations, and churches, synagogues, and mosques. It wasn't always this way. In the early days of federally funded legal aid lawyers not infrequently found themselves shunned and shut out. Many were not welcome in the communities they came to serve. The story of one person is illustrative of the transformation of the role of legal aid in American communities over the past 50 years. It is the story of John Rosenberg of Prestonsburg, Kentucky. John was born in Germany in 1931. As a 7-year-old, he watched with his family as Nazis burned his synagogue's sacred scrolls and then ravaged the synagogue itself on Kristallnacht. His family took refuge in Holland and eventually made it to the United States. He became an Eagle Scout. He went to college at Duke and law school at the University of North Carolina. He served in the Air Force. He worked in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. And then he moved to Eastern Kentucky to open a legal aid office, the Appalachian Research and Defense Fund, or AppleRed, in the 1970s. When he arrived, he was, according to a profile in 1997 in the New York Times Magazine, labeled a radical, a communist, and a glorifier of the poor. Landlords refused to rent him office space. The County Bar Association wrote to Washington urging that federal funds for AppleRed be withdrawn. An article in the Kentucky Bar Journal mocked AppleRed as a propaganda organization. But John did what legal aid lawyers do. He threw himself into the service of his community. Despite the criticism of him, he took on coal companies over safety and environmental issues, the federal and state governments over benefits programs, banks to stop foreclosures, housing authorities to block evictions, and a public school district that charged children for their books. He worked with other community organizations. He found ways to work with the bar associations. And eventually, people realized that John Rosenberg was making their community better. They realized that Eastern Kentucky was a better place to live because of John Rosenberg. He rose to leadership positions in the county and state bar associations. He delivered the Law Day speech at the state capitol building. Just last month, the city of Prestonsburg dedicated Rosenberg Square in their downtown in honor of John and his wife Jean, in recognition of all they have done for their community. And at the University of Kentucky's most recent commencement, John received, at the age of 92, an honorary doctorate in humane letters in recognition of all that he has done for his state. John is here. John, would you please stand? John Rosenberg, you are an American hero. You, John Rosenberg, represent the best of our country's values. And today, as we mark the golden anniversary of the Legal Services Corporation, you stand as a representative of the tens of thousands of legal aid lawyers who, over the last 50 years, have been responsible for realizing the vision of a nationwide network of community-based legal aid organizations providing, in the words of the United States Congress, equal access to the system of justice in our nation for individuals who seek redress of grievances. We celebrate today the generations of legal aid lawyers whose hard work and selfless service to millions and millions of clients has proven the wisdom of the vision that launched the Legal Services Corporation. You are all American heroes. This is your day. On behalf of a grateful nation, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Riskin, and I serve on the board of the Legal Services Corporation, and I'm very honored to be able to facilitate our amazing Client Leaders Council. And one of the geniuses that Edgar and Jean Kahn created when they were involved with the Legal Services Act was the requirement that every governing board be 1/3 clients. And that's because clients have so much to give, so much to offer, and want to do so. So today we are privileged to have the opportunity to hear from several individuals whose lives have been profoundly affected by legal aid. And I am really happy to introduce Chloe Brown to share her story of how legal aid saved her and her family. Chloe works as a social media manager and a body positive influencer on TikTok and Instagram. I have not met Chloe, but she is obviously younger than me. I tried to look her up and couldn't figure out how to get on those. But she seems awesome. And that kind of influencing and being able to share like that is really what we need. So she frequently works with national brands in their ad campaigns. So Chloe, please join me on the stage, and everyone help me welcome her.
Hi, everyone. This is my first time telling a story like this in this big of a setting, so bear with me. It's a little bit of a hard one for me to tell, but I'm very thankful to be here to tell it. So I'm here today to tell you how Neighborhood Legal Services saved my twin brother and I by providing free legal services when we were no longer able to afford them. When my brother and I were 4 years old, my father became extremely abusive towards me, my mom, and my brother. My mom divorced my father, and an immediate protection from abuse was put into place. My mom came from a middle-class family. She had her master's degree from George Washington University, and she had been teaching for several years. We never thought that we would be in a place where we needed free legal aid of any kind. For 6 years, my father abused my brother and I during court-ordered visits. We grew up in court, where my mom fought very hard to get us out of that household. And the courts wouldn't believe my brother and I, and they would not listen to our story, even though we had so much evidence against my dad. So every week, we would return home to my mom's after an absolutely horror-filled weekend at my dad's. I assumed my dad was going to kill us. It got to the point where I didn't know if I would make it home after every weekend. My mom finally reached rock bottom in her savings account after she wrote her attorney a $7,000 check. Her attorney, knowing that she was out of money, told her to start documenting every bruise, every cut, every inch of evidence we had in a photo album. So that's what we did, and we ended up with albums worth of bloody bruises. During one visit, my dad had beaten me so horribly before I got into the car to go home to my mom's, and I had 2 huge purple, black and blue handprints on my body where my father had grabbed me and threw me up against his trailer. My mom gathered all of the documentation of the bruises over the last 6 years and took us directly to the police station that day. The detective on duty advised my mom to take us to the crisis shelter. Once we were there, we were connected with an advocate who said to contact Neighborhood Legal Services because we couldn't afford an attorney anymore. My mom never thought that she would need to use free legal aid. After all those years, we were all a little resistant to think, how could a free attorney help us if the attorney we were paying for couldn't help us and no one would believe us? His name was Mark Krochka, and he was the first person who told me that the abuse was going to end and he was going to be the one to end it. And for the first time in my life, I felt like someone had believed me, besides my mom and my brother. Attorney Mark Krochka coordinated community resources to support my mom, my brother, and I. These included a state police detective, children and youth service caseworkers, and the crisis shelter advocates. With his help, another immediate protection from abuse order was issued against my biological dad, and there was also a founded case of child abuse. Someone was finally listening to me and believing me, and the abuse had finally been over. After all of those years, with his courage and dedication, Attorney Krochka refused to leave the courtroom until they believed us. Fast forward to today, my brother and I are both 26 years old. We never saw my biological dad again after his PFA was up. He never showed up, and it was a true miracle. I graduated from Westminster College in 2020 with a bachelor's degree in public relations and social media marketing. My brother was valedictorian of our high school, and I was homecoming queen. I went on to work for a national social media management agency, and I was able to develop my own brand while working there and really just learn the ins and outs of that. And my brother is graduating from dental school next month in Pittsburgh, and he's going on for his residency at Temple. I'm so proud of him. My mom ended up graduating from Johns Hopkins University in 2019 with her doctorate, and she now runs a statewide program called Brain Steps, where she helps children who have suffered traumatic brain injuries get reintegrated into schools. And she also serves as a legal expert for children who have sustained a brain injury. She met my stepfather, Tim, when we were 6, and he's been in our lives ever since. He's the best dad I could ever ask for. And although the first 11 years of my life were filled with trauma, I was finally able to receive help to end those experiences that we endured, even though the people who were supposed to protect me didn't. Because my family received free legal aid from Neighborhood Legal Services, we were able to resume a normal and successful life. My story is something that can happen to anyone at any time, no matter what job you have, no matter where you've come from. And the sudden need for legal aid does not discriminate. It was there when my family needed it. My brother and I were saved by Mark Krochka, who used everything in his power to make sure we were safe, and he would not stop until we were. And for that, we owe our lives to free legal aid through Neighborhood Legal Services.
That was amazing. That was so amazing. And I don't know that anyone believes that you haven't done this 100 times, because that was so amazing. Thank you so much for the courage and to giving voice to all of the other people out there. Thank you very much. One more round of applause for Chloe. And up next, we have a unique opportunity to hear from one of LSC's 50th anniversary co-chairs, and we have video remarks we're going to hear from the LSC president before Jim Sandman, Helene Barnett.
Good afternoon. I am Helene Barnett, and I had the privilege of serving as president of the Legal Services Corporation from 2004 to 2009, working closely with Frank Strickland, who was at that time chairman of the LSC Board of Directors. Prior to my appointment, I was a legal aid attorney in New York City for 37 years. During my time at LSC, we produced a major report entitled Documenting the Justice Gap in America, the current unmet civil legal needs of low-income Americans. It was released in September of 2005 and was a comprehensive national statistical study that provided compelling evidence of the unmet civil legal needs of low-income Americans. It helped shape the dialogue about funding for civil legal aid for the past 20 years. The drafting group, which consisted of John Asher, Alan Hausman, a few other leaders in the legal aid community, and members of the LSC staff, coined the phrase, the justice gap. The phrase quickly caught on, and everyone started referring to the need to close it, including the president, members of Congress, state legislators, judges, civil legal services providers, and the media. LSC issued updated justice gap reports in 2009, in 2017, and again in 2022. Each study was more sophisticated than its predecessor, but came to the same conclusion, that there was a huge unmet need for civil legal assistance. LSC grantees have done much to leverage and do more with the limited resources they have had, but we still know the overwhelming majority of civil legal needs are unmet. We still have an all too substantial justice gap to close. I returned to New York in 2009 and was appointed by the Chief Judge of the State of New York, Jonathan Lippman, to chair what became the New York State Permanent Commission on Access to Justice, and have served in that capacity for the last 15 years. Virtually all of our efforts have been designed to help close the justice gap. I am now pleased to introduce our next session of the day, a panel conversation with LSC's 50th anniversary co-chairs about how we may further close the justice gap, and in doing so, finally make our national promise of equal justice a reality. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Joseph Kennedy, former representative from Massachusetts, and now Special Envoy to Ireland, who will introduce our distinguished panelists and moderate this afternoon's session. Thank you, and enjoy the session.
Elaine, thank you for that. I don't know how to follow those last several speakers, so the good news is I don't have to. I've got 3 other people that are going to do it instead. I will also say, though, if you don't know who our co-chairs are at this point, I don't know what you've missed. We have 3 individuals here who are extraordinary barrier breakers and champions of this cause. And so I would like to ask our co-chairs to come join me on stage. I have also been asked, because we are running a little bit tight, I'm going to skip their bios. If I tried to read them, it would take the entire afternoon. So I'm going to ask them to join us, please, and we're going to jump right on into some very hard-hitting conversation as we jump on in. So please. Good afternoon to Ms. Myers, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Smith. Thank you all for being here. I want to start, again, I think you all know who these 3 individuals are and a bit about their background. But I want to start with the observation that you 3 obviously have been at the top of your fields in these various industries for a long time now. You could be doing anything with the small amount of time that you have where your main focus is not required. And yet you've chosen to devote your attention to this cause. And I was hoping that you could just start by telling us why and what drew you to it. So, Ms. Myers, to you to start.
Wow, I don't know that there's any better way to respond to that than saying, hearing stories like we just heard. I mean, this is such a wonderful program, and I did want to pause and just thank Legal Services Corporation for, and their leadership, of course, for this amazing effort that they lead in such a fantastic way. But one of the reasons that it is so important to be here and to do what you're doing, but to have even a tiny part of responsibility in it is because we have a justice system that is our third branch of government. And the justice system in our country used to be termed, I remember as a young lawyer, the best system in the world. Have you heard that lately? I don't think you have, and I certainly haven't. And the reason, in so much of the reason, is our inability to provide the legal system and access to it to so much of our population. And when you hear the crying need, just like you've heard described, it is essential to our rule of law that we do have a system that can be responsive to the needs of those who are least fortunate among us and have grave needs, sometimes life-saving needs. So we really do, it's a smart thing to do. As you can see, when Legal Services steps in, when help is there, you then have a restoration of people to contribute rather than to suffer. And so it is just so important also that we are a compassionate nation. We care about people's suffering, and we see the misery that is caused by lack of justice. And so it's easy to have an interest in serving in this cause.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Mr. Frazier.
Anytime someone says Mr. Frazier, I look around for my father.
I'll do my best. No promises.
So thank you. Let me start by saying what a true honor it is to be sitting in the room with 131 legal aid executive directors and their board chairs. You are truly heroes in our profession. I would say my interest in this area goes back to my childhood. I grew up in the inner city of Philadelphia. I'm the son of a janitor. He was the son of a sharecropper in South Carolina. My dad had a third-grade education. He raised 8 children. And I saw all around me what John Grisham referred to this afternoon as the working poor. People who had dignity, people who cared about their family, their children, but who struggled by obstacles that were put in their way, not necessarily intentionally, but obstacles nonetheless. And so as I was growing up, I saw people struggle to stay in their homes. I saw people struggle to get the kinds of benefits they may need if their child had a disability. And I knew these were good people. And at that time, I just thought that was part of being poor. As I became older and became a lawyer, I realized that those things were the result of the way our justice system runs. The fact that there are people who could have access to those benefits, people who could stay in their homes, people who could be protected from the kind of abuse. And I want to thank Julie and Chloe for that very moving presentation we just heard. I think Julie's talk reminds us that no 6-year-old child merits the treatment that she got. And the only question is, as a society, are we going to provide the resources necessary to protect children like Julie? So when I became a lawyer in Philadelphia, I decided that I would do a lot of pro bono work, much of it on the criminal side, but also some of it on the civil side. And when you would go into family court, you would find out, for example, that people who had to be protected from abusive spouses often didn't get that protection. People would be killed or hurt badly because they didn't have a lawyer. So I guess I would say that my interest in this probably stems from my childhood, but also stems from seeing firsthand how our justice system works and doesn't work. Our Justice Gap study says 92% of people's legal issues are either not addressed or inadequately addressed. Let's think about it, 92%. Why don't we just round it up and say 100%? In a country like ours, there's no excuse for that to be the case.
Brad?
Well, it's hard to follow that, Ken, but in some ways I would build on what you and Harriet both said. I think we're all to some degree the product of our own experiences, and for me, I think it was one specific experience that opened my eyes, frankly, to the importance of what you all do every day. I was a 12-year-old in southeastern Wisconsin, and I was, a very happy middle-income kid. And one summer, I decided I'd earn some extra money by going over to a nearby farm and picking onions, where you would get paid by the bushel. Everyone else there was really a migrant farmer. There were families that came up from Mexico, and I would get down on my hands and knees, that's how you'd pick onions, and I'd be next to these kids who were unbelievable. They worked incredibly hard. They were so much better than me. I'm like 1/4 of a bushel full. They're already up to the first bushel. But I got to see through their eyes where they lived at night, the housing conditions that existed for the migrant workers, their families. And it helped me appreciate that there was really no law to protect them. And I came away with a lifelong interest, first in migrants and then immigrants and refugees, and you could pull that thread to a lot of things I studied and then helped co-found Kids in Need of Defense. But what it really left me with was a lifelong appreciation that justice is, in fact, the cornerstone of our republic, but there is no justice without law, and for an everyday person, there really is not much law without a lawyer. And therefore, it just has always given me an interest in at least doing what I could around the edges to help people like you, people who I think dedicate not only your careers, but your lives to making real, that promise of real access to justice.
Thank you for that, Brad, and thank you all for those stories. They're incredibly powerful. Ken, I want to come back to you. I worked in law schools at a legal aid clinic, and then I was an entry-level prosecutor for a couple of years. And you don't have to spend long in either of those systems to realize that in many respects, those courtrooms, housing court or DA's office, are the emergency rooms of a justice system, right? You don't know what's coming through the door. Serious stuff gets referred elsewhere, but it's triage. You're the executive of a healthcare company. That system is also stressed to the brink. So I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about how you view these systems as interrelated, or what lessons we could take from the effort to try to make sure that everybody gets access to healthcare, about an effort to make sure that people get access to justice.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that in this country, too few people have meaningful access to health care, too. But there is a very important distinction, and that is that our government does take responsibility at some level to ensure that people get a minimum level of health care. We have Medicaid, for example, for poor people in this country. It's not always adequate, but it's a basic level of health care. I think the lessons that we've learned in trying to make quality care accessible to many people actually apply to the legal side. And I'll just use a couple of things that I think are things that are making a big difference today. I know we're going to be talking about technology later, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. Brad, you can talk about it. I know we have a presentation this afternoon about AI and what AI could end up doing But I think in the healthcare field, we saw, particularly in the pandemic, how important technology was in delivering healthcare to people, not just in inner cities, for example, but in rural areas where the ratio of patients to doctors is an ungodly ratio. So we learned in the pandemic that a lot of quality care could be delivered through technology, particularly, for example, with the mental health crisis that we have in this country. People just don't have access to physicians. The other thing that we learned is how we should think about the human support for medical care. So in Philadelphia, I'm involved with a group of people who are trying to train community health workers, because there never will be enough physicians or nurses to address the healthcare disparities in this country. And a lot of important work can be done by people who are trained, not necessarily trained to do surgery. They don't have to be. There's a lot of work that can be done. In my old neighborhood, my old zip code, I was talking to the dean of Temple Medical School, and she was saying that about 25 African-American men have an entire leg amputated each year at Temple because of peripheral artery disease, because they don't realize they have a problem. That's an analogy here. People often don't realize they have a legal problem. And so a big part of what we need to do is we need to use technology. We have to overcome the computer literacy problem that people out in the world have so that they can access it through the technology. And also we have to think about training some people to do some work that doesn't necessarily require lawyers, because while it would be a wonderful ideal for everyone who had a legal problem to be able to have a lawyer, the 92% data tells us we are so far away from that that we have to find other solutions.
I want to get to the technology question in a second, Brad, but before I want to go to you, Harriet. You have spent your entire career breaking barriers, right? From private practice to firm management to counselor to the president. And you have seen how structural barriers exist despite your ability to persevere through them. There are massive structural barriers that exist to ensuring this access to justice. I'd welcome your thoughts on what some of those are, given, as you cited already, that 92% figure.
Well, I think the solution to this whole problem is if we could clone John Levy. But seriously, the concept that John has been such a sponsor of, and really we are a product of, has been the Leaders Council, which involves a discussion beyond just lawyers and just judges, but taking out into the community, the business community, making these issues, the legal issues that people don't want to talk about and don't know about, taking those issues, these stories, to our entire communities everywhere so that there is an understanding of the difference that legal representation provides in legal confrontations, legal issues. So I would think if we could continue that in every one of our communities, that will help break down what people don't see as something that is theirs to deal with or their problem. And then we do need, to Ken's point, we need a different solution to all just lawyers for matters that can be handled by trained individuals. And we are in Texas very fortunate to have a very progressive Supreme Court, our Chief Justice Nathan Hecht, and somewhere here is our liaison, Justice Brett Busby, who is a tremendous advocate for legal services. They have led us to, as part of our commission work, to study paraprofessionals and how they can be trained, and also examining non-lawyer ownership, how that could spur innovation. So we will spend in our strategic planning over the next couple of years trying to implement the removal of the barrier of just there aren't enough people to step in and help through innovation.
Brad, it's a nice segue to you. We heard Harriet talk about the role of business here. You obviously heard Ken talk about the opportunity of technology. AI seems to supercharge that. There's going to be some that are threatened by that with the legal profession. There's also enormous opportunities about that in trying to fill that 92% need. So if you can tie this all together in less than 3 minutes, that would be super helpful.
I'll give it a try. It's all about connecting people to data and then AI. Look, legal services are always going to be delivered first and foremost by people. There will never be an adequate substitute for a great lawyer. But I think every great lawyer represents one client at a time and pours themselves into that and maybe many clients at the same time, but each client gets the lawyer's attention. That's indispensable. But to drive systemic change, because I think that's part of what brings us all together, you need to move beyond that. And the key to that is data. And, for example, some of the work that we've had the opportunity to support the last 5 years through a justice reform initiative is, in a sense, taking every Chloe Brown's photo album and building a data set so that across the country, community groups can gather the data and open the eyes of police officers or prosecutors or judges with respect to sentencing guidelines and start to move the needle towards a more equitable and fairer sense of justice. The future, I do believe, is extraordinarily exciting. And look, I'm a guy from Microsoft. What else do you expect? But I say this as somebody who's done pro bono work of one sort of or another for 4 decades. We should be able to use AI to broaden access to justice more in the next 10 years, frankly, than in the 5-decade history of LSC. Because I see what it can do in so many vital processes. We are a multilingual country. Translation can be knocked down as a barrier with AI to open up understanding of people in different languages basically instantaneously. We can use this to help gather data, to do first drafts of summaries, to analyze materials. It is a tool that I think radically can advance what individual lawyers or groups of lawyers can accomplish. We will never have enough lawyers in this country to serve everyone in need. But I do believe that with this new technology, we can go farther than we have ever gone before. And I think that should be our goal.
Brett, please. Thank you for that. And I think for many of the lawyers in the room, the fact that AI is not putting us all out of business is somewhat reassuring, so good to hear. If there's been a theme of the afternoon, it is storytelling. From the extraordinary panel we had with John Grisham and Chloe, your incredibly powerful words, Jim Sandman, John Levy, what you have shared this afternoon as well. I was served in public office. I won't tell you what part of Mr. Grisham's talk I found resonated most with me. It might be the voter part. But the piece here that I would say is I stole quotes from lots of people and often tried not to attribute them because it sounded better when somebody else said it. I will attribute this one to Jim Sandman because he said it over and again, and some of you will remember this. But I asked him about it on the way in, and it's still true that today, we as a society spend more money on Halloween costumes for our pets than we do on legal services. And it's not actually all that close. So to all those storytellers out there and 3 incredible storytellers here, thank you for your advocacy and your work to try to ultimately get on par with Halloween costumes.
So that That was really terrific. And in fact, while you're all still there, I'd like another quick round of applause for Joe Kennedy and our illustrious and fantastic co-chairs. Thank you all for all that you do. So my name is John Malcolm, and I have the privilege of serving on the Legal Services Corporation's Board of Directors. And it's now my privilege and my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, who represents Pennsylvania's 5th District, which includes a large swath of Philadelphia. I'll find out later whether my daughter lives within your district. Congresswoman Scanlon is one of Legal Aid's strongest champions in Congress and has been serving as a champion for LSC since she was first elected in 2018. As chair of the Congressional Access to Legal Aid Caucus and as a leader of the annual bipartisan appropriation support letter for LSC, she is a strong and steady advocate for ensuring that our low-income neighbors have access to the legal services that they so desperately need. Congresswoman Scanlon has dedicated her career to serving the most vulnerable as a lawyer and now as a member of Congress. Before she was elected, she served as an attorney for the Education Law Center. She was president of her local school board, and she was co-chair of the Voting Rights Task Force of the Association of Pro Bono Counsel. Currently, Congresswoman Scanlon serves on the House Judiciary Committee and on the Committee on Rules. Aside from chairing the Legal Aid Caucus, she also chairs the Youth Mentoring Caucus and the Caucus on Foster Youth. She has been a valuable supporter of Legal Services Corporation for years, speaking at LSC events and even appearing on Talk Justice, which is LSC's podcast, to discuss access to justice issues. We are delighted that she has taken time out of her busy schedule to join us today. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon.
It's so nice to be with this group of people here in DC. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me here today. It's such a great group of former colleagues and people I hope to have as colleagues as we move forward here. Also grateful to be with so many of the people who've been speaking, the stories that we've heard, including, of course, Special Envoy Kennedy, who started the Access to Legal Aid Caucus, and it's my honor to have succeeded him in chairing that caucus, and Ken Frazier, where we also share the opportunity, the wonderful history of having started our legal careers in Philadelphia with the amazing legal services community there and the robust pro bono world that has existed there. So it's really wonderful to be here. I know that some of my former colleagues in the public interest world from Philadelphia are here, folks from Philadelphia Legal Assistance. I was on their founding board when it had to split from Community Legal Services as a result of some congressional misaction back a couple decades ago. And I think there's folks here as well from Legal Aid of Southeastern Pennsylvania, which I have 3 counties that are involved in that as well. So it's great to have everyone here. I'm mostly grateful for the advocacy that all of you do every day. I wanted to thank you for taking time out of your schedules to come to DC and meet with members of Congress, because I think it's really critical that they hear about the importance of legal aid, not just to their individual clients and their constituents, but also its importance to our communities and the actual functioning of a civil society. So at a time when the rule of law is under attack, particularly from people who should know better, and we should expect to uphold and support the courts and our legal system and the guardrails of our democracy, I think the work of folks in legal services is more important than ever. Your convening at the Capitol brings a gravitas to the issue that is difficult to ignore, and you have compelling stories to tell. You all know how important the work of the Legal Services Corporation is and how grossly underfunded it is. You know that access to justice is not a reality in this country, with the justice gap continuing to grow while LSC funding has not kept pace. But many of my colleagues, even those who are generally supportive of the idea of legal aid, don't know this, and you can help draw their attention to it. Legal aid benefits constituents in every member's district. So please try to draw those local connections when you interact with those members, when you meet with the members or their staffs, and whether that connection is a connection of geography of their constituent clients, or it's about the connection to an issue that the member cares about. And I heard that some folks here had some really good conversations with members of the Judiciary Committee and others who they might not have expected to have such great conversations, but they were able to draw connections to things that those members cared about, like veterans or opioid issues. So where possible, stress the economic benefits of your work, the money saved, the benefits gained to their community. We all know that legal services have the capacity to change lives, and for too long, we haven't been able to share that word with enough people. That's why in my time in Congress, I've been trying to advocate for more funding and resources for LSC and other legal services programs, but I've also tried to develop some tools so that other representatives can integrate legal aid services into their constituent casework more thoroughly and thereby understand the importance of that work to their communities. If any of the offices you meet with, whether your time on the Hill or when you're back in district, if they seem receptive, please tell them about the training module that our office put together to help constituent services staff collaborate with local legal services in order to drive better outcomes for more constituents. Obviously, our legal services attorneys have a deeper knowledge about particular issues that are impacting our low-income neighbors than many, many constituent service reps. So they can get information there. We've done a lot of joint sessions where we've had members of legal services come in and help educate our communities about things like pandemic unemployment insurance or the impact of a new Social Security regulation. So we think that's really important. It helps our members of Congress understand better the importance of legal aid, but it also is able to leverage everybody's outreach and get better results for more people. So I am proud to co-lead the letter to the appropriators again this year, calling for robust funding for legal services. And your presence on the Hill is a big help there. I am also eternally grateful to those members of the corporate community who've supported legal services and pro bono services. I used to be pro bono counsel in a large firm, and having our corporate clients on board was a huge boon. I suspect that it's a big boon as well in the political world, so thank you for your engagement. I'd also like to call on this group to think critically about how we engage people, young people today, because we need their passion and their leadership as the fight for equal justice goes on. And they have huge wells of passion, but how do we make it relevant today? Just as people seem to have started taking our democracy a little bit for granted, I think people take legal aid a little bit for granted, and we need to make it relevant. We need to make sure that young people understand just how important it is in our communities. So, moving forward, it is an honor to try to serve with you from this different position that I'm in now, but please let me know how I can be helpful, or if I can follow up with anyone that you met while you were on the Hill this week. And I look forward to continuing to work with you all. Thank you.
Please join me in another round of applause for Representative Scanlon. Who we thank not only for her inspiring words today, but her consistent and ongoing leadership in bringing America's promise of equal justice for all to be a reality. Hello again, I'm Ron Flagg, President of LSC. It's my pleasure to introduce our next segment for the afternoon, aptly titled Legal Aid Impact Projects That Change Lives. We've heard a lot today about the justice gap. I spend a good portion of my life educating people around the country and in DC about the justice gap. But what I actually enjoy talking about even more than the justice gap are the innovative means that all of you out in the field come up with to address the justice gap, to help the people in need in your communities with, you have inadequate resources, so you have to be innovative, thoughtful, and diligent to come up with increasingly better means of serving the many people who need your help. We're going to hear about 5 such innovative projects that our LSC grantees are working on to close the justice gap in their communities every day. This is going to be a rapid fire program. Each of our presenters are going to come up for about 5 minutes, and we're going to jump right in right now with Alicia Johnson from Legal Aid of Western Missouri. Alicia, please come up.
So much. Good afternoon. My name is Alicia Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Legal Aid of Western Missouri, and I'm really proud to present this idea. Like most executive directors, the great ideas do not come from us. They come from our amazing staff. So this came from our Deputy Director, and the funding for the idea came from LSC, from the TIG and TIP funding. And I just want to say that it is really great to have this funding. It gives us an opportunity to have fun. And as lawyers, this is our version of having fun, is to do projects like this. So thank you to LSC for that, and also to A2J. They provided project direction, technical assistance for this project. So our project is the applicant callback scheduling system. And we came to the online intake world really late. So we were able to learn a lot from those of you that came before us, and it was pretty much almost every program came before us. And so one of the things that we learned is that after applicants would complete their online intake application, there was inevitably this phone tag that occurred between the applicant and between legal aid staff. Back and forth they would go to try to finish up the intake or to do the interview, whatever the next step was. So what we incorporated with our online intake application is we actually incorporated a scheduling feature. So applicants that go in, they're able to access a calendar and they're able to set the time that works for them. And I want to stop for a minute to say this because I know that many of us strongly, strongly believe in access to justice, but I really believe that access to justice starts with our programs. And it really starts with how we streamline access to our own legal aid organizations for our clients and our applicants. So when the applicant fills out the scheduler, they will get these appointment reminders, and those come through via text, just like they would through a doctor's appointment, a dentist appointment. And I don't know about you all, but I really rely on the appointment reminders. They're pretty critical for me to be able to coordinate my day and my life. So the applicant gets this appointment reminder. And so what does that do? You know, it is so frustrating to go into a case management system and to read the notes where you see the back and forth between your staff and this client, trying to reach them, the client's trying to reach the staff member. This prevents all of that. And that appointment reminder feature also gives that client the ability to reschedule if needed. And they don't need to do that through a staff person. They can automatically do it through the scheduling feature. This is also a very trauma-informed process and project. The client can, and starting March 1st, we have changed up this project to actually allow the clients to go directly to the paralegal on the team where they need the legal assistance. We are starting it with one team and then growing it. So they are ideally only telling their story to one person, making it trauma-informed. The other side effect to this project was the fact that it made our staff so happy. They could plan their day around these appointments. So thank you all very much. 5 minutes is not a lot of time. I think I did it wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Our next speaker is Lee Pliscu from Micronesian Legal Services. Take it away, Lee.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lee. Well, there's a lot of you out there. I'm with Micronesian Legal Services. I'm here with the president of my board, Mr. Marcelo Peterson, who, among other things, is the former governor of the state of Pohnpei, which is one of the 4 states within the Federated States of Micronesia, which is one of the locations in Micronesia where we have legal aid offices. I wanted to start my presentation with something memorable and something inspiring. And when we got here on Sunday, we had a little bit of time to visit some of the memorials, and there's certainly memorable and inspiring inscriptions to draw from there. But I don't know, it's just not my style to start with 77 years ago. So I settled for a while back. So go with me on this one, please. So a while back, I was visiting another one of our offices on the island of Guam, and I was talking with some of our staff there, one of the paralegals, and I was asking her what was she working on that was inspiring and interesting for her. And she began to talk about identity documents for our clients. And a lot of people in Micronesia need legal help with basic identity documents like birth certificates. And she was talking with such passion and knowledge about her subject that I was inspired to pull out my cell phone, and I said, Millie, can I just record what you're saying? And because we want to put this out to the people who need to know what you're saying. And she said, sure. So I started a little interview with her, and started just by, Millie, we were just talking about identity documents and how important this is, and what do you think people should know about this? And so she came forth, and we published within about 15 minutes, we had a video up on social media. Within a couple hours, it had 4,000 views. And I thought, okay, this is the beginning of a project which has since been funded by Legal Services Corporation. Thank you, sir. And it was the origin of our community education, providing legal information through videos. So there's 2 things that I want to say about our videos. First, these interview-style videos, short, off-the-cuff, spontaneous, work for us. We could do very polished, perfect videos. This is what I would like to do, but when I try to do a perfect video, I end up not doing it. Other things come up, and so these short, off-the-cuff, impromptu videos of staff worked really well for us. The second thing is we've sort of developed the practice of recognizing opportunities for community legal education and grabbing a hold of those and taking advantage of these spontaneous, off-the-cuff opportunities to do community legal education videos to put knowledge that we think our clients need into the hands of our clients. So one of the tools that we use is to ask our staff, what are you working on that you're excited about? What do you think our clients should know about what you're working on? So I want to give you a quick example of this. I know, 5 minutes. Won't take long. So one of the things that I wish more people knew about was how to get free civil legal aid help when you need it. So if you're from Micronesia, I hope you know about Micronesian Legal Services. We have offices in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, each of the 4 states of Micronesia, which includes Kosrae, Pohnpei, Chuuk, Yap, Republic of Palau, office on Guam, also in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. But what you may not know is that we have sister organizations throughout the territories in mainland United States. So if you're from Micronesia and you're in Hawaii or the mainland US or other territories or states, there is a legal aid office near you that provides free legal help in civil areas. And part of the reason for this is because there is the U.S. Legal Services Corporation, which provides funding to 130 other organizations, just like us, nonprofits that provide free legal help. Well, in fact, I'm at Legal Services Corporation's 50th anniversary celebration, and here we are all together. So, two things about this. So number one, how to find the legal aid organization closest to you, lawhelp.org. So get online, lawhelp.org. That'll point you to the nearest legal aid organization to you. Secondly, not everybody knows that Micronesians are eligible for free legal help. So if you have a passport from the Republic of the Marshall Islands, you have a passport from the Federated States of Micronesia, you have a passport from the Republic of Palau, please contact a legal aid office near you and ask for free legal help. If anyone has questions about eligibility of Micronesians, contact me. My name is Lee Plisco, Executive Director of Micronesia Legal Services. Hang on. Oh, and? Okay. So, my time is up. Thank you for this amazing, it's posting to our Facebook page now. This video could be a lot better, but it's hopefully good enough. So check in a minute, it'll be on our Facebook page, I hope. Thank you for this amazing opportunity to help people create and access justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee, for your courage of doing this live. That's like jumping out of a plane without a parachute. But and I'm particularly jealous of the 4,000 views. If I get more than 100, I call my children and tell them I've gone viral. But our next presenter is Sonia Belafont from New Mexico Legal Aid.
I know Lynn Jennings is here somewhere, and I know someone else just ran over the 5 minutes. So before I get the timer started, I have got to do something, okay? So just give me 30 seconds. We are standing here on the 50th anniversary of the Legal Services Corporation, and I get to speak. So I want you to shake your shoulders, because that means I am standing shoulder to shoulder with all of the advocates in this room and across the country who have allowed me to stand here after a legal aid attorney assisted my mom when I was 4. So I feel like I could give the client story instead of talk about some of the amazing work that we do. My name is Sonia Belafont, and I am proud to stand before you as the Executive Director of New Mexico Legal Aid. I'm also excited to say that my board chair, Karen Myers, joined me today. So I've only been at New Mexico Legal Aid for a year, so I cannot by any means attest personally to the hard work that went into this project. But I can surely stand here with a very proud chest, representing each of the 120 staff members at New Mexico Legal Aid who make this particular project accessible to another community that is being victimized and now has some advocates to stand with them. So in my 5 minutes, allow me to share with you our initiative, our access program that gives legal assistance to members of the LGBTQ+ community who are survivors of violence, much like myself. So, my board chair was kind enough to remind me that I tend to speak very quickly, particularly when I have a lot of coffee. So in my head, I have Karen Myers, speak slowly. And when I get done, I'm hoping she's gonna tell me I get an A. So in the meantime, let me talk to you about the setup for the Safe to Be You project. Specifically, we started with some incubated casework. We looked at discrimination. We looked at the difficulties they were having accessing public accommodations. We also looked at the fact that in rural areas and in specific communities such as frontier and indigenous communities, their barriers were even larger than those other marginalized and lower income clients that we assist in every day and every breath that we take. I'm remembering to breathe. Some of the public services they can't access include 911, law enforcement services, and medical providers. So that led us to 2016, where we sought federal funding from the Department of Justice. Our focus has been on gender-based violence against those who are members of the LGBTQ+ community. We addressed the lack of access, the compounded barriers. The internal data revealed some incredible facts that we were disheartened to discover. They included this particular vulnerable community experienced worse outcomes than those who were not members of the LGBTQ+ community. More importantly, their cases were incredibly long-term and arduous casework, and the life expectancy of a transgender female in New Mexico was less than 30 years. Their inability to access public services meant they were likely to be victimized again and struggled in a host of communities. So let's talk about the initiation of the project. We did this work, we sought the funding in 2016. The project started in about 2017, and in 2018, on the very far left of your screen, you're going to see what amounted to an incredible discovery. Following a rural radio campaign, we got 100 cases. And we began to break the case types down, and the screening revealed something quite interesting, which meant that we had to go deeper. Our access had to be broader. We had to look at community-level advocacy and impactful casework. So that's what you see as we migrate to the other side of my slide. And that really tiny print can detail the diversified work that we discovered in 2022, which meant not only were we looking at domestic violence, we were looking at civil rights, employment discrimination, disability rights, education access barriers, and individual rights. A key fact here I'm going to share with you is that in 2018, individual rights comprised 1% of the casework. By 2022, it was 25%. So our priorities shifted. I'm looking for Lynn. We shifted to expand available civil resources. We tied in our pro bono referrals and began our impactful litigation. And now, Lynn, almost my last slide. Let's talk about the future of Safe to Be You, because we should all be safe to be ourselves. We now have appellate litigation in the 10th Circuit. We also have collaborative work to combat discrimination in public schools. We have pro se guidelines and pamphlets that we've crafted. We have additional areas of the law that we've expanded into, including school discrimination, where students are self-identifying themselves as being non-conforming, whatever that should be, or they're identifying on the LGBTQ+ spectrum. As a result, what we're noticing is that we're seeing an increase in violence. We're seeing politics take a frontline seat. And so we're seeing families fleeing westward, which means, of course, we have to increase our access, increase our resources. So at New Mexico Legal Aid, we have a helpline in this area, and we're beginning to track the trends because we recognize that this project is just the tip of the iceberg, much like what we're seeing in our offices. And by the way, my name is Sonia Bellavant, and I'm the Executive Director of New Mexico Legal Aid.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Up next is Dan Glazier from Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. Dan?
You guys are gonna. Yeah, you're gonna do my slides. Yeah. Thank you, Ron. I am Dan Glazier, and I have the honor of being the Executive Director of Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri, but we serve 21 counties throughout Eastern Missouri. And I am joined by our board chair, Ben Burkemper, here today. And we are here to encourage you to replicate your own version of our neighborhood advocacy program, which we patterned after a program that was done in Legal Aid of Western Missouri. So let's pay it forward, right? Next slide, please. If you serve an urban area, likely it has abandoned or boarded up properties and vacant lots, which negatively impact our clients' lives each and every day, our quality of life. Imagine school kids walk into school and seeing dotted vacant building after vacant building as they're trying to make their way to school. And in St. Louis, we have quite a few, as we know so many of you do. Next slide, please. So to address this, in 2018, we launched our neighborhood advocacy program with a goal to support neighborhood organizations. We all know this. Improving neighborhoods is a justice issue. It's a racial justice issue, it's an environmental justice issue, and it's certainly an economic justice issue. And lawyers are needed here. Lawyers can help. How? How is this accomplished? You ask? All right, here we go. Next slide, please. Well, it's partly done through place-based pro bono partnerships with a legal aid co-counseling model with those pro bono lawyers. And this is very important. And for us, helped by two critical LSC Pro Bono Innovation Fund grants that really help make a difference. And with those, and with partnering with all these law firms, we're able to bring badly needed legal resources to residents at the community level. And it doesn't have to just be lawyering. Think beyond the legal work to encourage pro bono partnership engagement and cleanups, potlucks, and attending neighborhood meetings. Get involved, get connected, have these neighborhoods know that lawyers are there and lawyers care. Next slide, please. In working with neighborhood associations, we recommend including a mix of transactional litigation, individual litigation, and systemic legal work. We developed 3 categories of services to strengthen community, prevent displacement, and promote locally driven redevelopment. How do we do this? Category 1. We provide governance and technical assistance. And I mean, this is vital information that these pro bono lawyers bring and we bring to these community groups who they know their neighborhood. They know what they need, and we just try to help. Category 2, we resolve tangled titles and use estate planning sessions to prevent property abandonment and help residents stay in their homes. When grandma owned a house and the kids always assumed that the grandkids that they would get that house because they were there each and every day with Grandma. And nobody talked about estate planning. Nobody talked about what do you do when Grandma passes. You know what happens to those buildings? They become vacant because the kids don't own it and they have to walk away. You can use, as we did, location data on clients served to choose the neighborhoods to focus for your program. Category 3, work with neighborhood associations to acquire abandoned property, as we did under something called the Missouri's Abandoned Housing Act. Under that act, neighborhood associations can get legal access to blighted and neglected properties. Your state may have a similar Abandoned Housing Act. Yeah, there are challenges to this work, absolutely. The work's hard. The need is great. And neighborhood politics can be a little messy, right? But we've seen some incredible outcomes. Next slide, please. Look at these before and after pictures. That's what they are. In the program's first 5 years, and we've been around for 5 years, the program served 277 households to preserve home ownership through title clearance and estate planning. We served 34 distinct St. Louis City neighborhoods on 265 legal matters. Those legal matters and those legal interventions have preserved $7 million in home equity and opened the door to $5.9 million in private investment into formerly vacant and abandoned buildings, returning more than 300 units of housing to the market after this work. Can you go back one slide, please? Go back one slide. Last year, we opened a satellite office to house our neighborhood advocacy program in the heart of the neighborhood. And it's a hub for a lot of our work, and it's been a very wonderful thing. Thank you so much. Neighborhood advocacy is helping clients reclaim their neighborhoods. Appreciate the time.
Our last highlight comes from my home state of Wisconsin, where our two grantees, Dee Dee Peterson and Beth Ann Richland, are going to make a presentation.
Yes. Okay. Great. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Beth Ann Richland. I am the Executive Director of Judicare Legal Aid. Serve the northern 33 counties in the state of Wisconsin and Native Americans statewide. And I'm joined by my colleague, Dee Dee Peterson, who's the Executive Director of Legal Action of Wisconsin, which serves all the urban areas in Wisconsin's 39 southern counties. We get along famously well. We love Wisconsin. We say it that way too. We partner collaboratively quite well. And this project is very important to us because not only has it been very impactful and very successful, but both of us sat at the table with some very important people to think out this project while neither one of us were executive directors of our programs. And here we are today, both leading our programs and this incredibly successful project called the Crime Victims' Rights Project. And the background for this project was that crime victims' rights existed statutorily in the state of Wisconsin for a very long time. And they were on the books, very pre-Marsy's Law, if you've had that in your state. Statutory rights for crime victims were on the books. And they were a little vague about what you could do as a representative of a crime victim and whether or not there was standing to represent a crime victim as a third party in a criminal action. And so we started this project to really flesh out the law that existed already and to enforce the rights of standing for attorneys for victims as third parties. It's a little bit complicated to explain, but neither the prosecutor nor the defense represent the victim. The prosecutors represent the state, the community, trying to protect their community from the crime, the perpetrator, and then the defense, of course, is the counsel for the accused. So who is representing the rights of the victims that are statutorily allowed in the state of Wisconsin? So we will. In 2018, we started this project. We had a wonderful honeymoon period where attorneys were allowed to research the law and write fake pleadings and come up with briefs before we started doing some incredible outreach. 6 years of this program, we began outreach to very new partners, Victim Witness. That was very new to us. We stayed in our domestic violence, sexual assault advocacy lane, working with our shelter partners. We did not reach out to the Victim Witness. These were very new people to us. Working with prosecutors, working with defense counsel. I gotta tell you, nobody liked us. So we knew we were doing something right. The goal of the project was to protect the sensitive information that was being requested by defense counsel of our victims. So they were seeking mental health treatment records, records of domestic violence advocacy, and we would assert their rights as third parties. But it was very hard because first we had to cross that threshold of standing. 6 years of this case, 6 years of this project, we took on a case very early on that became State of Wisconsin versus Alan S. Johnson. We took this case from a very small town in central Wisconsin, Waupaca, and represented a sibling pair that had been childhood victims of sexual assault. This became, over the course of 4 years, a landmark Supreme Court victory in Wisconsin in 2023 that found that attorneys for victims had standing in the state of Wisconsin, and also that victims could not be required to release their protected medical records or be found not able to testify in the trial of the accused. That line of case law was called Schifra Green. So of course, we have won a lot of awards along the way that we are very proud of. In 2018, we won a Wisconsin Legal Innovator Award. We just won a national award this year from the National Crime Victim Law Institute. And of course, our Supreme Court victory. We've helped numerous clients assert their rights in court for things like restitution, longer prison sentences for their perpetrators, and just standing to assert their rights for a speedy trial. We have a lot of ongoing challenges. This is a VOCA-funded project, which comes September 30th of this year will cease to exist. There are lots of legal deserts in our communities where we have no one to represent these victims, even if they were to be represented by counsel now that they're standing. And of course, we have lots of our clients have particular obstacles as being victims of a crime. Do you want to do lessons? We have no seconds.
No, I don't. I just wanted to say, do you want to do lessons learned?
No, you go ahead.
I just want to say one thing. Chloe, what happened to you is not okay. And the reason for this project is because what happened to you is not okay.
Beth Ann, Dee Dee, thank you for that. And thank you to all of our presenters. These are just 5 examples of the innovative and impactful work done by all of our grantees across the country. I wish we had enough time to highlight all of the tremendous innovative projects that are done throughout the country. In the meantime, let these 5, let's share our applause for these 5 and all the rest of our grantees.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, presenters. And Ron stole part of my thunder. I was supposed to tell you to applaud, but instead of that, I'll tell you there are refreshments outside because we do not take a break until 5 p.m. If you need cookie or something to drink, they're right outside the door. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Nooner, and I have the distinct honor to introduce our next speaker, Congressman and House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, and I can guarantee you he won't go over his time. Unfortunately, Congressman Emmer couldn't be with us today in person, but he's graciously agreed to give a videotape presentation highlighting the significant impact of legal aid within our communities. Congressman Emmer has represented Minnesota's 6th district since 2015. He was elevated to House leadership by his colleagues to serve as Majority Whip in 2022. For 6 years, he served on the Financial Services Committee and was previously the Vice Chair of the Congressional Access to Legal Aid Caucus before becoming the Majority Whip. Prior to his election in 2015, Whip Emmer was in private practice and started his own law firm. He also co-hosted a morning radio show on popular Twin City News Talk AM 1130. Whip Emmer has been a frequent speaker at LSC events and is a strong voice in support of legal aid for low-income Americans. We appreciate Congressman Emmer for sending us these remarks, and I'd ask you to please roll the video. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Congressman Tom Emmer, and I have the privilege of representing Minnesota's 6th Congressional District. While I'm extremely disappointed that I can't be with you in person to celebrate Legal Services Corporation's 50th anniversary, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you for the work that you do. As many of you know, I am an attorney. Like you, I believe that everyone in our country deserves access to representation. For 50 years now, Legal Services Corporation has championed this cause by providing access to legal resources and representation for millions of Americans in need. You actually protect the promise of justice enshrined in the Constitution by our founding fathers. But there's still more work to be done to address the justice gap in our country. These problems aren't going to solve themselves, but with organizations like the Legal Services Corporation leading the charge, we can make a real difference. The fight for basic legal assistance is not a Republican or Democrat issue. It is an issue that we must work together to address. We remain committed to working with our colleagues to secure the resources the Legal Services Corporation needs to support this important cause. Keep up your great work, and thank you for all you do to provide every American a fair shot in our justice system. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Sunday, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Paladin, a pro bono engagement platform. I'm also a member of LSC's Leader Council and a former chair of its Emerging Leaders Council. I want to once again thank Representative Emmer for taking the time to record and share those remarks with us. Please, another round of applause for the representative. Next, we'll be turning our focus to LSC's future and the future of access to justice. It is my pleasure to introduce our next panel, which will consider the promise and potential pitfalls of deploying AI to help bridge access to justice. LSC President Emeritus Jim Sandman is back with us to moderate this exciting discussion with 3 leaders in the legal tech and innovation community. Margaret Hagan is the Executive Director of the Legal Design Lab at Stanford University. She was previously a fellow at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design, where she launched the program for legal tech and design, experimenting with how design can make legal services more useful, intuitive, and engaging. Satish Nori is the executive director of JustFix, a housing justice and technology nonprofit. For 20 years, he represented tenants across New York City at various legal services organizations. He's also a clinical professor of law at New York University School of Law. Andy Perlman is dean and professor of law at Suffolk University. He's a nationally recognized voice on the future of legal education and law practice. He has served as an advisory council member of the ABA Task Force on the Law on Artificial Intelligence and as the inaugural chair of the Governing Council of the ABA Center for Innovation. With that, I will pass the mic to the man who needs no introduction, Jim Sandman.
Our topic is artificial intelligence and access to justice. The problem of access to justice is a problem of scale. It's huge. And solutions to it also have to be at scale, huge. Artificial intelligence offers the potential to democratize justice and bridge the justice gap in ways that other interventions have not. And that's what we'd like to talk about this afternoon. We're going to start with Andy Perlman, and I'm going to ask Andy to give us a rapid-fire course in what generative artificial intelligence is and how it works, and to give a couple of examples of how it might be used to improve access to justice in two ways. One way is to improve the efficiency of legal aid lawyers and legal aid staff in a way that will allow them to serve more clients with a higher level of service. The other potential use is a direct-to-consumer use, providing legal information and advice directly to people in terms that are understandable, relevant, usable, and accurate. I'll then ask Andy to give us some thoughts on how we might realize the potential of artificial intelligence and minimize its obvious risks, and also to say something about the cost issue. This sounds like a great tool, but legal aid organizations are not famous for having a lot of money. How do you deal with that problem?
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to do all of that in 8 minutes. So let's start with what generative AI is and what it's not. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. The reality is that generative AI is a subset of the larger category of artificial intelligence. And lawyers have been using AI for quite some time. If you've used Westlaw or Lexis or a variety of other legal search engines, you have used AI. Generative AI, however, is a lot newer. And what it involves is enormous volumes of information are absorbed, and we can generate new forms of writing and music and images, and now even video, through a variety of prompts. And in terms of text, generative AI can produce professional caliber writing. Now, what's notable is that people describe this as a technical matter, and I'm really happy Brad Smith isn't here anymore because I would mess this up. That as a technical matter, we describe it as generating and predicting the next word in a sequence. But at some point, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between predicting the next word in a sequence and what we might think of as an analysis. Let me take you completely outside of the legal context and show you a picture that I took of my daughter, who's in college. She's on the right. She was in a play from the 1940s called Arsenic and Old Lace. And like any nerdy father would do, I uploaded the photo to ChatGPT. And I asked ChatGPT, I said, well, what do you think is going on in this picture? And remarkably, it was able to discern that this was, in fact, a play, and the two people in the image were likely wearing a wig. But that's not what blew my mind. What blew my mind was the answer to the next question, which is I asked, what play do you think it is? And from this very little information that you see in the image, it suggested Arsenic and Old Lace. So I present this example to you to show you what are the possibilities of these tools in terms of inference, making sense of data, And now let's talk about generative AI's implications for legal services. Now, Jim mentioned two, and I'll give you very brief examples of them, but before I do, let me make one additional point. Here is what it is already doing in terms of law. Somebody had the brilliant idea of asking generative AI to take both the LSAT and the bar exam. It didn't do particularly well in November of 2022, failing the bar exam and getting an LSAT score of 149, which is in the bottom 40th percentile. But you fast forward just a few months, and what's remarkable is that it now achieved a score that would have been sufficient to pass in every U.S. jurisdiction and received an LSAT score of 163, which is in the 88th percentile, just in a matter of months. Keep in mind, GPT-5 is likely to come out later this year. So now let me turn to the points that Jim raised. There are opportunities here, both to scale existing legal services, but also to make more legal information and services readily available and more readily available to the public we are all trying to serve. An example of scaling existing services. Imagine putting these tools in the hands of lawyers who are trying to serve as many clients as possible. Brad Smith alluded to this idea of scaling. This example I created when I was making a presentation to Jim's class last year. I asked ChatGPT to draft a complaint in a slip and fall case as a result of somebody falling on the sidewalk outside someone's home after a snowfall. And here ChatGPT goes to work, creates a caption, the allegations of the complaint. Check out paragraph number 6. It inserts a Philadelphia Code provision. I looked it up. It's not a hallucination. It imposes a duty on homeowners in Philadelphia to keep their sidewalks clear after a snowstorm. It was right on point. It inserts an allegation or account for negligence, and even at the end demanded a jury trial. I next asked it to generate interrogatories from the defendant to the plaintiff in the case. And it goes to work and identifies what we all might consider boilerplate interrogatories, nothing terribly surprising, the kind of interrogatories that you might actually find online. Until you get to interrogatory number 4, where it knows the context for the slip and fall case and asks the question, please describe the footwear you were wearing at the time of the incident. It knew enough to ask that kind of question. And then finally, what I asked it to do is attack its own work. I asked ChatGPT to draft a brief in support of a motion to dismiss the very complaint that it originally drafted. And it gave me 3 coherent arguments in support of that motion to dismiss. Now, would I file this brief in court without looking at it first? Not if I want to keep my law license, I would not. But can you imagine these tools serving as a first draft for lawyers, very busy lawyers who are trying to serve as many clients as possible and give them the attention that they need? I think the answer is most certainly yes. So that's an example of how I think we can scale our existing services, but I think there are ways in which we can empower people to help themselves. I created this tool myself using ChatGPT. It's called a Legal Aid Navigator. And it uses GPT's information, its large language model, and I trained it to be able to guide people to appropriate resources in their jurisdiction. You can see here I said, I'm facing foreclosure. What should I do? The very first question that I forced the tool to ask in every case is, what jurisdiction are you in? And then ask, what language are you using? You heard Brad Smith mention before the capabilities of these tools to be able to translate into other languages. And after a couple of pieces of information, it directs me to resources in my jurisdiction, including websites and phone numbers. At my law school, at Suffolk Law School, we have a legal innovation and technology lab where we are working with courts around the country to help to automate legal documents and make them more accessible to the public so that they can complete these forms on their own and file them directly in court. You might think of it as essentially the turbo-taxing of legal documents. And we've put this all together using AI in a simple search box where somebody can say what kind of problem they are facing. And we can interpret what is there and then guide them to automated forms where they can complete it themselves and, as I mentioned before, file it directly in court. Now, is this a good substitute for a lawyer? Not necessarily. But can it help when people don't otherwise have access to legal services? I think it is, and it's better than what many people currently receive. So I'll close with some cautionary notes. Jim asked me to highlight them, and I will. Absolutely, these tools make stuff up. They hallucinate. There is no question about it, but I can tell you they are getting better. I've already seen remarkable improvements over time in terms of their hallucination. They can also make you believe something is true when it is absolutely not. If anyone wants to hear a few stories, I can tell you some. We need regulation. Everyone acknowledges that we need regulation, including we need to think through the legal ethics implications, but I think they are surmountable. And we also need to consider that these tools absorb the biases that we all have and that there is algorithmic bias from their use. And then finally, Jim alluded to the cost of these services. There is an equity from these tools. The more money you have, the better tools you will have access to. And if you don't have money, you will get access to less sophisticated tools. This is an issue as well. But I'll end with this thought. The closing thought when we imagine generative AI and the future of legal services and access to justice, we have to ask the question, relative to what? Relative to the current state of affairs? I won't repeat the 92% statistic. You know it all very well. When we think about bias, we have to ask the question, relative to what? Relative to the current system, which has no bias in it? Or how about the inequities? What about the inequities of our current system, where more money doesn't have an effect on how much justice you receive? These are all problems right now. If generative AI can address those issues more effectively than is currently the case, we have to consider it. Thank you very much.
Andy, that was terrific. If you ever get tired of your law school gig, I think you have a second career as a Ronco salesman on late night TV. I have a couple of questions for you. What is the current state of the art for this audience of many legal aid lawyers? What is their ability right now today to use tools of the type that you just demonstrated? And which of them are the best? Make a recommendation and name names.
Brad Smith is gone? So the reality is it depends. Which is the law professor answer, and I also think it's true in this particular case. It really does depend on what the use case is. My experience is ChatGPT-4 is probably tied with Anthropic's Claude as the most sophisticated tool when it comes to language and generating coherent language and uploading information and making sense of the information. Those tools are accessible, and I used only those tools when creating the videos that you saw. They are $20 a month. That's how much it costs to get at. And if you have tried only the free version of the tools, you're really missing out on what they are capable of doing. So to the extent that, and I know even $20 a month can be a major expense for a resource-constrained legal aid organization, but it is worth trying to find one person in your organization who can try these out, learn how to use them, and eventually, hopefully, make them more readily available to the rest of the organization, because I really do think it has enormous potential for impact.
Thank you. Satish, you've been a legal aid lawyer, litigating housing cases for 20 years. You now use artificial intelligence in your work and in your clinic at NYU. Can you tell us the story of before and after, the experience that you had as a legal aid lawyer and how your use of generative AI today has affected your ability to serve clients in housing cases?
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Dean, for that wonderful introduction to the issue of AI. So I've been a legal services lawyer in New York City for over 20 years. And during that time, I've represented maybe 1,000 families, and I've never lost a case. I've come in second many times. But, well, I thought you'd heard that joke before, but feel free to steal it. But what I find most frustrating about legal services work as a practicing on-the-ground lawyer and manager is the number of people that we have to turn away, the amount of triage that we do, the amount of diversion that we're doing. And so as someone who's always been interested in technology as a way to address the access to justice gap, I immediately started playing with AI tools. And what I realized, and as Dean Perlman described, They are extremely effective at delivering information if you work with them properly. For example, at Legal Aid in New York City, we have a hotline, and one of the most common questions that we get is, where is the courthouse? Or what are the hours of the courthouse? Or where do I find Form X to file in my eviction case? And what happens is our staff is burning out answering these questions hundreds of times every week over and over. And they don't feel effective. They don't feel impactful. And with AI, we can build models, and we're experimenting with this in New York City, that deliver the right answer in any language instantly. And they work 24/7, 365. So I think we must adopt, experiment, implement these tools in a careful way. And in terms of resources and efficiency, I really see this pivotal moment where we can do 10x, 100x more than what we're doing now. And when we refer to that 92% number, which we've heard over and over today, we can bring that down. We can tackle more and more problems. We can make sure our staff is more effective, and we can deliver better outcomes for people.
So can you give an example of your own use of and the tool that you've developed to make your work more efficient?
Absolutely. So a common example that we face in New York City is someone gets evicted because they failed to assert a legal defense in a timely manner. And in the public housing context, this happens when a person is seeking to assert their right to take over a lease. However, if they miss the deadline to write a letter to their housing manager in their housing project to assert this claim, and time passes, it becomes too late. And so I played with ChatGPT and tried to build a model in which a tenant could generate a letter, kind of like what Dean Perlman described and demonstrated. And in a second, with the right parameters and prompts, and with feeding the model the right information, and that's another element of this, and we can get into that afterwards. You can ask me about it, and Dean Perlman can talk more about it. You can generate a letter. And had someone in this position generated a letter and sent it, they would be able to have a chance to keep their home. And that's something that legal services organizations in New York City and elsewhere lack the resources to handle. We can't do these one-off services. We can't do them quickly enough. Often people come to us and it's too late.
So Satish makes a very important point about what you feed into the artificial intelligence tool that you're using. You can use it to draw from the internet, or you can use it to draw only from a subset of information that you've supplied it with. Let me give you an example that I'm familiar with here in the District of Columbia. I live here in DC. In this city of about 710,000 people, we have about 40 legal services providers. Every one of them has their own self-help tools, their materials online available to people who need assistance. You can use generative AI to feed all of the self-help resources that these 40 legal aid organizations have generated into a unit, and then ask the generative AI tool to summarize it, to produce sort of a best of the best, pull it all together and integrate it, so that instead of having to do it 40 times, you can do it once. And if it's curated properly, if you have experts overseeing it, you can provide the best of the best to your community, and you can do it in language they can understand. I encourage all of you, if you haven't used generative AI tools, to give them a try. You will be amazed at the clarity of the communication that comes out. I'd like to next turn to Margaret, who is the world's greatest expert on bringing principles of human-centered design to law. And Margaret is a thought leader in how to manage the risks of generative AI, how to generate standards that will improve the accuracy, maximize the potential of generative AI while minimizing the risks. Margaret?
Hi, everyone. Is the mic working, or should I do handheld? I'll do handheld. So first, can I take a poll? I know it's that time of the afternoon. Could you raise your hand if you're optimistic about the potential for AI to close the justice gap? How about those who might be more pessimistic? Do we have any? I know that there is a healthy debate out there, and I want to acknowledge that. I want to talk through this because I think about this a lot. I have the privilege of being at a university where I get to think big, think strategically, think nationally. And our lab at Stanford Law School that has worked on improving access to justice for the past 10 years. We've worked on websites, we've worked on text messaging, we've worked on new service models. We are interested in the potential of AI, but we don't want to rush headlong into full-blown optimism. We want to really think strategically and empirically. So the first, I want to talk about 3 shifts that I think, especially those of us who have power about what legal aid services look like, what court services, what community justice worker services look like, that we should be thinking in a little bit of a shifted way about the potential for AI. The first shift I'd like you to think about is just at the big picture. Oh, I think it looks dark over here, but that's what I want. This should be white in the background. Oftentimes, when I go to conferences in the academic world, there's a big debate between optimism and pessimism. I'm a believer in realism, techno-realism, that instead of making kind of our guesses about the future of AI based on our hunches or our anecdotes, we need to be talking to people. We need to be gathering data, and we need to be responding to how people are actually behaving on the ground. So in our lab, we've been interviewing people. We've been interviewing adults across America about if and how they would use AI for legal problem solving. So we've been doing this in courthouse lobbies and by recruiting people on Facebook to be interviewed by us. And we give them a fictional legal problem. We give them a scenario that they got an eviction notice on their door, and we ask them before they use the tool, before they use AI, how valuable they think AI would be and how trustworthy it might be. That's the graph that you see on the top left. Kind of middle of the road, 3 out of 6. AI might help me, it might not. I'm not sure if I would trust it. After they try out a tool like Bard, now Gemini, or ChatGPT, you can see on the top right how they shift in terms of trust. And on the bottom 2 diagrams, you can see most people find it 6 out of 6 helpfulness. And they say, after trying AI for legal problem solving, most people say 6 out of 6, I will be using this again. When we hear quotes from people about why they find AI helpful, we can see that likely there is going to be a consumer shift from starting at Google search, which most people are starting at Google search right now when they have a life or legal problem. But we can imagine it shifting to AI in the next year or 2. Like one of the women we interviewed, African-American woman in her mid-30s, she's a HR generalist, she has some college. She loved that AI laid things out step by step, plain language, easy ways to understand, helped her get a plan to actually take action for an eviction notice. Or a young man in his 20s who works in construction, he also found the AI surprisingly helpful. This task of legal research, it was daunting before, but now AI makes me feel like I can do this, I can get started. Or a woman in her early 50s, she wasn't going to rely on AI for everything, but she said, this gives me a starting point. I can see that there's a recourse out there. I know how to get in touch with people. This is a better way than the other ways that existed before, whether that's talking to your friends and neighbors, or calling hotlines, or going to Google. So we see that there is this huge interest in the public for AI tools for problem solving. But I'm sure all of us are thinking, is it actually good? Is it hallucinating? Is it making up quotes? Is it making up case law? Is it making up fake legal aid groups? And that's why we need to think in another shift about how we plan for AI in the justice system. And this means going from a reactive stance, where we in the justice community and lawyers are kind of waiting to see what tech companies like Google and Microsoft, OpenAI and Anthropic, What are they going to do? What kind of models are they going to release? Instead of being reactive to what the technologists are doing, we need to be proactive. We need to be in there with these tech companies right now, helping them set the standards and make the models better for what we know are the possible harms. So we need to think about a regulatory and policy approach that's not reactive, which means waiting for harms to happen and then getting attorney generals to prosecute the companies that are violating privacy, causing harms, kind of how legal tech has been regulated in the past. Instead, we need to be setting up leaderboards. We need to be evaluating the models right now, what ChatGPT is offering, what Anthropic is offering, what Google is offering, and we need to be rating them. How good are they at answering people's landlord-tenant questions in the state of Georgia, in the state of Missouri, in the state of Pennsylvania? How many times are they getting it right and wrong? We need to be publishing those quality standards and those ratings and putting pressure on the technology companies to get accurate legal information and helpful legal information. And that means not waiting around, but measuring them and measuring them often. So my lab, in addition to interviewing regular people, we've been interviewing legal experts, folks who run law help websites, hotlines, staff legal aid clinics, and other frontline services. And we've been asking them, let's get specific about quality metrics. Let's really define how we measure if an answer to a landlord-tenant question is good or not in a very engineer-friendly rating. We're using those specific metrics to now start auditing GPT 3.5, GPT 4, Google Gemini, to see how often are they producing high quality or low quality answers. Because we believe that by constantly benchmarking and auditing these technology companies, we can put pressure on them to improve their performance. The final shift is thinking about how we develop solutions. Again, for those of us in the room, all of the executive directors, the funders, the strategists, how do we actually get AI to start closing the justice gap? And the big shift here is from thinking about local one-off pilots, like a great example in New York City, to thinking about coordinated and systematic research and development. And that means bringing cohorts together so that folks who are working on great housing answers in New York City are talking to people in Missouri, California, West Virginia, Oregon, that we are building those data sets, those tools, and that knowledge around all these different tasks that legal aid groups do, whether that's answering people's questions, providing coaching and support, helping people prepare for mediations, checking over documents. We need to have national cohorts that are working together on getting data sets, building best practices, and building tools that can start working at the national level. That's a lot of information. I'll stop there. Thank you so much. You can scan this QR code if you want to see more of the research we've been doing.
Thank you, Margaret. I have a question for you. It's a question about timing. When? I'm getting impatient with closing the justice gap. You got a room dominated by optimists here.
Yeah.
The question I like to ask these days when anybody proposes some solution to the justice gap is, in what year, in what decade, in what century will your solution close the justice gap? I think we need to ask that question. So when? What is the timetable for implementing the kind of steps that you're talking about here?
Well, in many respects, the cat's out of the bag. The big companies have published these amazing tools, ChatGPT, Gemini, for free, giving instant free access to some amount of AI for people to answer questions, try to generate documents. So it's out there. The lawyer and internal regulator in me wants to pull it back a little bit with standards, with quality benchmarking, to make sure that we are getting the least amount of hallucinations, the highest accuracy. But in some respect, the cat is out of the bag. For all of those behind-the-scenes tasks and for lawyer-driven AI innovation, we need to be starting now. And thanks to TIG support, that hopefully we'll see a lot of really great coordination and lots of new pilots coming out with the TIG funding this year. We built a great cohort applying to a TIG this year of legal help website administrators, 6 different states, coming together to propose how AI can help amplify the services they're able to give in all of their states. So we need to be working right now, and I think making sure that we as lawyers and folks who really are prioritizing good justice outcomes are getting involved with all of the technology companies who are putting their tools out there for the public right away.
The plan that you outlined requires a lot of collaboration across different sectors. Who's going to own that? Who's going to be the convener that brings those entities together to address the issues that you've identified?
Well, it's going to be networked. I think universities can play a great role in doing a lot of the empirical research. Can these AI tools actually live up to the standards we want to set for them? Legal aid groups and executive directors, court help centers are going to have to work with us to help really make sure we have clearly defined standards. I think groups like LSC can be a wonderful convener to bring technology companies to the table so that we can make sure that we're communicating with them about how their models are actually performing on these crucial tasks.
This Rockstar panel not only just communicated a whole lot of valuable information, they did it in 30 minutes. Would you please join me in thanking them?
Good afternoon. I appreciate your sitting there and still going along with all of this wonderful information and sharing. I'm Gloria Valencia Weber, and I'm a member of the LSC's Board of Directors. And it's my pleasure today to introduce our next speaker, Melanie Andrews. And Melanie, you can come up here. And in some ways, Melanie represents what a previous speaker, House Representative Mary Scanlon, said, that we have to somehow attract and interest young people to be engaged in making real access to justice, not just ideas, but making it live in the life of human beings. Now, Melanie Andrews is a member of the Seminole Nation in Oklahoma, and she, like every member of a federally recognized tribe, is a member of 3 sovereign states: the USA, the state in which her tribe resides, and the tribal sovereignty of the Seminole Nation, of which she is a member and has returned after her education. She began her education at Eastern College University in Oklahoma, and she has a bachelor's in legal studies and a minor in Native American studies that led to her work as a child advocate. And then she began working in several ways with legal services. One, she is a board member with Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, one of our prime providers exclusively funded for services to Native Americans. And Melanie now works as a juvenile case manager with the Seminole Nation Tribal Court. And in talking to her about her work, she told me that a prime area of work is with at-risk juveniles, and juveniles in hard points in their life who need help, possibly as individuals and with their families. And they follow what is not unusual at all among the indigenous nations, the indigenous culture of within the United States, that you have, in this instance, juvenile healing that happens through the justice program and how it works. And so she works with juveniles and their families, and with something called the Cree Oaks Family Functioning Therapy Service that does not ask families and individuals to make long treks across wide open spaces, but comes to a small community, Wawoka, which you probably have never heard of, but is a small town, and they come from Tulsa, from this therapy agency, to work with the people involved in the justice system of the Seminole Nation to sort out what has to be done. And Melanie is here today to share her own story about her past and how she is working to bring justice to others. Thank you, Melanie.
Do I stay up here? Thank you, Gloria, and hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'd like to start by sharing a little bit about myself. I'm a mother of 4 girls and 1 boy, ages 16 and 21. I'm about to be a grandmother in September, which I'm really excited about. Like Gloria said, I do have a bachelor's in legal studies and a minor in Native American studies. I am a member of the Seminole Nation and have been working with the Seminole Nation for since 2021, first as a child advocate and now as a juvenile case manager. When I first came to Legal Aid, I was actually a student at East Central University. The head of the Legal Studies Department, Christine Pappas, had gotten me a work study job in the legal clinic that ran out of our university by Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, or what we refer to as OILS. There I helped my supervisor and attorney, Nikki Lindsay, draft expungements and wills, and I did legal research for expungement cases. During this work, made me realize how legal aid could help improve my life. You see, I had a criminal record. My record included a DUS, which is driving under suspension. I also had speeding tickets and a DUI. This affected my life, especially because with the DUI was a felony. I know it was going to be hard to get a job with a felony on my record. I never had thought about expunging my record, didn't even know I could. Then one day while I was helping Nikki in the legal clinic, I came across a case that changed my life. The client literally had the same charges that I had on my record. I watched as Nikki was able to help this client, and then I approached her about my own case. She told me I should fill out an application. Nikki was the absolute best with working with me. I was able to get my record expunged. I have a great job, which I love. I actually now sit on the board of directors for OILS as a client representative. I am so grateful that my record didn't hold me back. My experience in my life, including my time with OILS, have made me realize how important it is always to ask for help, because you never know until you try. This is an important lesson for us all to teach our youth as well. So many of our young people are struggling to make connections for them, and helping them see where their resources are. There are support systems, there is help, and that can change their lives. It did for me. As I mentioned earlier, I am a case manager for the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Program in Seminole Nation Tribal Court. I'm also an interim program coordinator, so as Gloria stated earlier, we are helping our at-risk youth, not just our own tribe, but any tribal members that's within our community. With the McGirt ruling that just recently happened, in 2020, I think it was, McGirt ruling happened and our caseload has jumped. When I first started with the Seminole Nation Tribal Court, we only had 4 employees. Now we have 20. So I think that speaks for itself on how many more cases we got, just because our jurisdiction as a sovereign nation has been reestablished to us. But before I end my remarks, I just want to thank OILS for all they have done for me. Because of their help, I am able to help others. I love working with the youth in my community, and I thank God for putting the right people in my path to help me with my criminal case. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Will Gunn,
the Vice President for Legal Affairs and General Counsel for the Legal Services Corporation. Previously, I had the great honor of serving as the General Counsel for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs during the Obama administration. Today, I have the privilege of reading a letter from President Obama, the 44th President of the United States, in honor of LSC's 50th anniversary. April 9th, 2024. To everyone gathered for the 50th anniversary of the Legal Services Corporation, welcome to Washington and happy anniversary. For half a century, the Legal Services Corporation has been providing high-quality legal services to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it, working to make our civil justice system as fair and accessible as possible. I'm grateful to all of you for continuing this essential mission and for everything you're doing to make a real and lasting difference in the lives of your clients and communities. The fact that we have so many talented, hardworking people in rooms like this one and in legal resource centers across the country, looking out for some of our most vulnerable citizens, gives me hope. And I know it does the same for the men and women you serve. I'm wishing you the very best for your time together and look forward to many more years to come. Barack Obama.